For sure. Okay,
Was that
so here we
sort
are.
of clap?
That it's a habit. You always got to pick on that. Always, it's nonstop. So there, is that better? More
There you
intentional.
go. Right.
It's been an ongoing joke with the clap to start the episodes. So this is easy to count though, because this is season 2, episode 1, and I know that for sure. So I'm not screwing up the episode count at all. And we have a very, very special guest today, the maestro himself, Mr. Stephen Aron. He has been our instructor and motivator for most of our collegiate careers. And he was taught Neil Zaza. He's going to be teaching another interview, or he taught another interviewee we have coming up. And we just wanted to reach out and talk to him, and get the latest and greatest from him, and reminisce about all the fun stuff that we learned under the tutelage of Stephen Aron. So welcome so much to this first episode of the second season of Wood, Air, and Metal podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you both and to talk to you, and I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, this will be a blast. It'll be a blast. So, just a little bit of background. Myself and Tim met each other in 2006 at University of Akron, studying under Stephen Aron classical. Tim was a madman and decided to go for classical and jazz, where I just was a bright-eyed fingerstyle guitar player saying, hey, I can do classical. It's just fingers. And then I got into the reality of it, and it's not just fingers. There's a little bit more to it than just that. So, Steve, why don't we start out with the typical thing? When did you get started playing music, and who was the inspiration? How did you get into this whole thing?
Well, I think like most guitarists, I came into it through popular music. I played in rock bands as a bassist when I was a teenager, and I played in jazz bands. And when I was in college at first, I was in a band in New England that toured all around the region, and as a bassist, and knew that I wanted to pursue music seriously with those experiences under my belt, but wasn't sure really which direction to go in, knowing that electric bass wasn't the object of music major option at really any conservatories. So I thought, well, I need to become a double bassist and go the orchestral route, learn how to handle a bow, or I need to look at the guitar side of the electric bass guitar and maybe become a serious classical guitarist. And at that time, I'd had a little bit of experience in classical guitar, just like 3 months of lessons, and I decided, that's it, I'm going with guitar. So I auditioned at a couple of colleges for entry as a classical guitar major and got in one of the places. The others, I just wasn't good enough to even get admitted. And the rest is history, I guess. So after a little while, I did drop the bass. They overlapped for a couple of years, but then I let it go and focused on the guitar.
So you started classical at the collegiate level, like before that, just those 3 months of lessons and then right in the deep end of the pool?
Absolutely. I really started classical guitar lessons at age 17.
So
I was a classic late starter.
Did you play guitar though still, like along with bass? Were you sort of learning the chords and things like that?
I had just a little bit of knowledge. I mean, I had an electric guitar at that time, a 57 Strat, and it was.
I hope you still have
guitar. I wish I still had it. The mistake we make when we're young.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I sold it for what I thought was a brilliant profit, but nothing compared to what it would have been worth now.
Right.
Anyway, so yeah, I played a little bit, but only the most rudimentary electric guitar, not the kind of guitar playing that you guys do. I knew some chords. That's about the size of it.
Sure.
Wow. So that's a Wes Montgomery-ish. I mean, he started later on as well, just and ended up blowing up the jazz field. He kind of did that with class. I mean, come on, you were starting at 18, and then you went up to the master's degree straight through school, no break in between.
Well, I had started college a little bit early, and when I went to the conservatory, I started at Hart College of Music in Connecticut. And I transferred there from another school where I'd had a couple of years of academic courses. And I didn't want to do 4 more years of undergraduate. And so I asked the teachers if I could do it in 3 years. And the only problem was the guitar lessons. Everything else seemed to be on track for me to graduate in 3 years. And my teacher just said, well, you'll have to pass a junior jury at the end of your first year of lessons instead of a sophomore jury, or rather a sophomore jury instead of a freshman jury, so that I could be admitted to the junior level. And I thought, that's going to be impossible. I've only been studying for a few months. And he said, well, it's worth trying. And so I kind of dug in hard, and sure enough, I was able to pass. And so I got the undergraduate degree in 3 years, and then went straight in for a master's.
Wow. And where was the master's degree at?
I started studying at the master's level with a West Coast teacher who was recommended to me by a guy named Michael Lorimer, and this teacher's name was Thomas Patterson. Tom Patterson at that time was teaching at Western Washington University in Bellingham, Washington, and it was the year before he got his job at the University of Arizona in Tucson. And so I was halfway through my master's. He got this other job. I followed him there, and I was in the first graduating class of Tom's at University of Arizona.
Awesome.
And he's still teaching there now. He's still maintaining his program as a full-time professor.
That's amazing.
So yeah, I studied with him, left and got a teaching job, conducted my entire career, retired from my job at University of Akron, which was 6 years ago, and Tom's still going.
Yeah, you're just lazy. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, he's really showing us how to do it.
I mean, I guess if you like it that much, I mean, I enjoy teaching, and I don't have any real plans to retire, but that's a long haul right there.
Yeah, so, it's very impressive.
Wow.
So
and now you're.
Oh, you mind me butting in for a second? It says Steve.
Go ahead, Tim. It's all you.
So you were on this bass path, and at some point you kind of suggested that you wanted to be serious about it, like as a conservatory level musician, let's say. But when did you actually fall in love with classical guitar? Because kind of like, so was it already seeding before you started, or did it happen somewhere in your studies, or when did you say, oh, man, I love this?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a girlfriend when I was in the 8th grade who played classical guitar. She played a few Carulli studies. I mean, she was just a beginner. And at that time, I'd been playing blues a lot and some rock and roll on electric instruments. And when I heard that, I just was captivated. I thought, that's incredible. She can play the melody and the accompaniment at the same time. And the sound of it was just really beguiling. And so I got an instrument, and I didn't start lessons until that year before my conservatory year. But as soon as I started lessons, I knew this was like immediately far more captivating to me than any of the musical endeavors I'd been in before.
Yeah.
I mean, I loved all the different styles, and I played a number of different styles of music, but this was just something special. So really, it was from the very beginning. And, it was just, trying to imagine being an orchestral bass player. Like, it was a theoretical idea because I already played bass, but it didn't resonate. I had no real connection to symphonic music or to orchestral playing or to playing with a conductor. None of that was part of my world. And so it didn't really make any sense to follow that for me. And the guitar was I just loved playing solo classical guitar.
Sure. Awesome.
So you competed in the GFA. What year was that? And were you still in college during that time, or was that after?
So my experience at the GFA was the year 1983. And that was the year that the GFA had the convention in Quebec. And I had started teaching at the University of Akron in 1981. So this was after my second year at Akron. 81, 82, 82. Yeah, after the second year, I was a young faculty member, and I was in my, early 20s.
Wow. So that, do you mind if we talk about that
Adam for a second?
No, I'm happy. I can remember it like it was yesterday.
Okay. Adam, can you just talk to people who are listening who aren't classical guitar aficionados? What is GFA?
The GFA is the Guitar Foundation of America. They run they run a lot of classical programs all over the country, but they're known for the big international competition that happens once a year, and it moves locations. There was one at Oberlin in 2006. That's when, me and Tim went up.
2005. 2005.
Five?
So,
Okay.
Yeah. The Guitar Foundation of America is the largest organization dedicated to the classical guitar in the Western Hemisphere. There is a similar organization in Europe, but the GFA is kind of the mothership for classical guitar in North America. This annual competition they have, which takes place at their annual convention, has become kind of the most highly coveted guitar prize in the West. Well, recently a few others have emerged that are equally interesting for the competitors because of the size of their prizes. But the GFA includes in the prize a large concert tour for the winner and a recording that they contract with Naxos Records. So this is a really remarkable prize.
Certainly.
And the winner can play as many as 50 concerts in the year following winning, as well as make a recording at their expense. So it's a remarkable push for a young artist's career.
Right. Yeah.
Back in
Kickstarter.
1983, back in 1983, they weren't doing the tour yet, and they weren't doing the recording. And my experience led me into the finals, but I wasn't the first prize winner, so I wouldn't have gotten those anyway. But it was quite a remarkable experience, and it was a great boost for my career at that age.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. That's crazy.
Yeah, so I guess anyone who's listening, it's kind of like a huge publicity thing for you, right, to kick off your stuff. So now you've made connections with different people that it makes sense. You probably helped open up doors for little tours and things like that, and all kinds of things.
What happens at these conventions is that we hundreds of classical guitarists, like at conventions for any trade, converge on a location, and they have a trade show selling instruments and music and so forth. And in the case of the guitar, there are all those concerts, master classes, and lectures. And we all, but most of the action happens after hours at meals and in the bars and late at night in hotel rooms or what have you. And there's a lot of visiting and hobnobbing and what you would call networking nowadays. So sure, we meet each other, and the people we meet, we tend to see again and again throughout our careers at successive conventions, whether put on by GFA or smaller regional ones. And in truth, it's a relatively small world we function in, and so it doesn't take long to get to know kind of everybody.
Right.
And this was the first large convention I attended as a young guitarist, and I certainly made a lot of friends that week that remain friends today. So, for instance, one of the other finalists that week was Adam Holtzman. And Adam became a prominent player as a guitar professor at University of Texas in Austin. And he was a student of his brother's, Bruce Holtzman, who's professor of guitar at Florida State. And those guys became good friends, and I saw them many, many times throughout my career. And he and I were hanging out during the finals that week, and we were both young guys at that time.
Awesome.
Wild. That's just so. Within the course of around 8 years, you went from never playing classical guitar to placing in the finals of the GFA.
Yeah, more like 5 or 6 years. Yeah, I know. I was just kind of pushing pretty hard. I mean, my teachers always said, practice, like X number of hours a day, and I just took them at their word, so I did. They would say practice for 5 hours, I practiced for 5 hours. If they said 6, I went 6. I was maybe not independent enough to decide to take a separate path and go only for an hour and a half. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I just did what they said. I don't know. I practiced hard, and frankly, there were fewer of us then, I think, compared to the field that we're in now. I don't think I'd have succeeded as well with the level of playing I had then in today's world. The level of playing has gotten so much better. But that would be true for all of us, I think, at that time.
Yeah, sure.
So that's a good point about the level of playing, because I was just going to ask, well, eventually I was going to ask, but might as well segue into that now. Over the course of your 40 plus years of teaching, Have you noticed that, like, when let me back up for a second for reference. I was reading an interview with a concert pianist. I can't remember their name, and they were also a big pedagogue, and they were mentioning that, that when I started out, the pieces that were the unbelievable difficult pieces were accessible only to the pros. And he's like, now I'm teaching these things to my 13, 14-year-old students, and they're nailing these things right out the gate. Do you find that same idea of like the difficulty in terms of pieces at a younger age with more virtuosity is becoming commonplace today as it was compared to your start?
Yeah, it's been a very steady progression. I mean, almost with every passing year, the level has gotten better, and the quality of playing of young people has increased particularly. And this is a direct result of increase in the quality of pedagogy. So when I was a student, I mean, certainly my teachers taught me how to play guitar, but there were so many problems they didn't know how to solve, at least not in any kind of reliable and consistent fashion.
Sure.
And that would be true, I'd say, for pretty much all the teachers on the scene back in the 1970s. And for instance, it was kind of standard among guitarists to regard a player who could hit all the notes in a piece as having arrived at the pinnacle of the field, because it was so uncommon for a guitarist to be able to play through a whole piece without making mistakes. It's like, to think of that now just is so absurd. But it's like the way we learned music and the way we analyzed, the way we used our hands and the way we used our bodies and the way we trained our minds to understand what was happening. It was so juvenile and so kind of basic compared to what happens now. So, sure. For instance, the students who came out of the programs then went on to teach maybe at a higher level than their teachers brought to the game. And then our students, like my students, I'll speak specifically, brought to the game not only what I taught them, but what they picked up along the way in master classes and what they discovered on their own, and they teach at perhaps a higher level. And then their students, again, more so. But then if you look at the field today, and the tools available, the resources available. I mean, just point to YouTube as kind of the resource beyond all resources.
All right.
I mean, imagine when I think about what it would have been like to have been able to hear and watch any piece I wanted for free instantaneously and play it back at half speed if I want, and then see 10 other people play the same piece and compare the fingerings, all for free from the comfort of my bedroom. It's just like, it's unbelievable. And oh yeah, and that's what people have available to them today, not to mention all the additional resources, online master classes and tutorials, and the scores are available instantaneously. And just, when I think about the struggles we would go through to get our hands on scores, or how far we would drive to see a player perform just to hear a piece, it's just a different world. And so with those resources, in addition to improved, more sophisticated pedagogy, the level, of course, has come up and up and up. I will say that I like to imagine that I played a signal role at one specific juncture, and that was the Guitar Foundation of America convention in 2005, which I hosted in Oberlin, the second time I hosted a GFA convention. I insisted, when they asked me to do it, I insisted that if we were to have a convention at Oberlin, that it would be necessary to have an international competition for high school age and younger contestants. And they'd never done that before. It's always been the adult, no age limit. And there was like, I don't think there will be enough players that are good enough at the high school age or younger to have a competition of this level. And I said, yeah. I assured them that there would be, and I said, don't worry, this will be good. And I'll tell you, when that competition took place in Oberlin and those finalists played in Warner Concert Hall in front of like 700 or 800 people, you could hear the jaws drop on the floor of that hall as the quality of the playing revealed itself. they were as good as or better than the adult professional players in the older level competition, the International Collegiate Artist Concert competition, and it's been that way ever since. The younger ones are just pushing the bar every year, and it's because they have fantastic teachers and they have all these resources.
Sure.
I shouldn't dismiss also the quality of the instruments. Like a lot of great luthiers creating really great instruments and understanding better how to set them up. And for instance, when I was a student, everybody was chasing large size instruments. I had a Ramirez guitar that was 665 scale. This is a centimeter and a half longer than what we call standard scales, which is 650. But a lot of guitarists really thrive better with a shorter scale instrument, a 640 scale guitar, and more luthiers are making them, and people are consequently playing instruments better suited for their body sizes, and there's just better results all around.
There's a fair amount I want to unpack and all of that.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. I think we definitely have seen all the things you're seeing too, right? The advancement. I mean, Adam and I were right before, like, our formative years, at least, were right before the internet really took off. So we were still scrounging to find, like, tapes or whatever of some thing that, like, piece that no one's ever heard of and you can't even find in the library. You try to go some other library to find it, or you couldn't just immediately get a piece. Maybe you could get on the internet then and you could download a song all night, and maybe it worked the next day and you could hear it. So one of the things I wanted to question, so Adam and I have talked about this a few times, but when you listen to violinists, let's say, from the early 1920s through the 50s, if you can get recordings, there was a lot more, I don't want to say artistry, but let's say interpretiveness to the pieces. So you'll hear Bach and it's almost like romanticized a bit. And it has such a, like, you can almost identify the player instantly upon hearing them. But there's sort of been this trend where that's not really acceptable anymore, to romanticize Bach, for instance. And there's sort of, you're losing a little bit. The quality of playing is better, for sure. The performers are better in the classical realm, but they're sort of losing a little bit of, like, personality or something to each piece. I'm wondering, do you notice at the same time that the performances are getting better, the quality is better, is there more of a sameness to the results, or is there still a pretty individualistic way of interpreting the tunes? And actually, I'm curious too if you think that's a good or bad thing. So I know where I stand on it, being who I am, whatever. But I'm curious what you think about it and how that trend's happening. Have you noticed the same thing? And hopefully that question makes sense.
That's a great question. So it's definitely true that prevalent styles of interpretation go through sort of cyclic evolutions, and you can say there was a height of sort of performer-driven, opinionated interpretations, what we might call highly romanticized, in the mid-20th century, and kind of a reactionary movement after that, where things were treated with maybe a little more strictness, and this, when it's combined with a sort of avalanche of players whose technical proclivities sort of outstripped their precursors by just miles. So we have players now newly able to do technically what was almost unthinkable earlier, but maybe without the artistic impulse to stake their own territory with respect to interpretation. But that, again, it's kind of, you could sort of see it as a little bit cyclic, because I think it's come back the other way recently, where it's more common to see players bringing truly original interpretations to pieces than it had been, let's say, in the previous couple of decades. But also the arrival of our instrument to stand shoulder to shoulder with, say, pianists and violinists in terms of technical ability, enables then the guitarist to turn their attention more freely to matters of interpretation, and as a consequence, we'll see far more players whose interpretations are really brilliant and inspiring than you might have seen in recent years previously. But that doesn't mean that everybody's doing that. Like, it's certainly possible to find players whose performances can seem a bit mechanical or can seem a little timid with respect to interpretation, and so, you know, I think we exist in a world in which all these things exist simultaneously, you know, and there are certainly regional influences. You can talk about the school of playing that comes from Central Europe, or that comes from Central South America, or that comes from the Far East, and that there might be, you know, things that you could generalize, but even so, I think it has more to do with the individual impulses of players. And I'm happy to say that the players who seem to be rising to the top in recent years are ones that I find to be very, very creative indeed, and ones who are bringing some, you know, remarkably original voices to the field.
Right.
And not just with respect to, let's say, the interpretations they bring to familiar works, but with respect to programming in general. You know, like what pieces they play, and how adventurous they are with finding and creating new repertoire.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
I mean, you got Johannes Mueller, who's got like 2 CDs of original works on top of his GFA win, and that traditional quote-unquote classical repertoire that he's playing. I thought he was brilliant, personally.
Right. I mean, this is the same kind of path I've followed, because I also have 2 recordings of completely original music, and you know, I think in a way all my colleagues are looking for ways of adding to the repertoire. Like, for instance, writing your own music is just one way to do it. You can also arrange music for the instrument, like I've done quite a bit of that, where you bring music originally written for other instruments to the guitar, and in doing so kind of expand the repertoire. Another thing is to work hand in hand with composers, and you know, be the one who champions their music and maybe give the premieres, and that's a really important thing to do, and a lot of my colleagues are spending good portions of their careers dedicated to that. And finally, there's the work of musicologists, you know, bringing sort of hitherto unknown works or composers maybe to the light of day, people whose music might have been lost or forgotten. And so I think that in all these arenas, most players are doing one or another, if not several of those things.
I remember myself and classmate Gary Stewart went through the archive at the University of Akron doing the GFA recordings. I think we did like 300 tracks over a summer for that, just to record some. And these were guys that I don't even remember some of their names. They're so obscure, you know, turn of the century or turn of the 19th to 20th century composers and guitarists, that it's just like, okay, let's go to the next one. And I mean, Gary was brilliant on basically look at the thing, okay, ready, do it, record it, and move to the next track. But that was pretty wild to kind of get a view at the unknowns, you know, like the popular ones obviously rise to the top, and everybody can recall, you know, just their works. But these other guys that were just kind of sitting in the background, it was just interesting to see why, you know, in one sense you could tell why they didn't come to the forefront. It was like, well, that's a song, okay, let's move to the next one. But in other ones, it was like, oh, that was really cool. You want to? I'm disappointed that didn't get more of a prominence that was out there. But that's you know, obviously subjective to me to an extent. But I found that whole experience fascinating.
It's in addition to being subjective, it's also subject to a certain degree of whim. Like the music that, let's say, the most prominent recording artists of certain generations, say Julian Bream and John Williams, the composers that they recorded became the composers everybody was familiar with for many years. And then the composer, the prominent artists of the next generation, let's say David Russell, Manuel Barrueco, Elliot Fisk, and so on. Then suddenly they bring new composers and new works that we hadn't heard of before to prominence. And then now younger performers are doing the same thing with even more obscure works or obscure composers that we didn't know of before. When I was coming up, it was really popular to dismiss music from the 19th century categorically, like, well, that's just guitar music of that period is second-rate music, and there isn't very much of it, and we can cry a salty tear that we're not pianists because they have the good stuff, and we'll just focus on our Latin music, But when you get back in there and look at what we actually have and look at it in the context of trying to play it with some awareness of style and some awareness of context, some awareness of how the music was imagined and envisioned by the composers, then you realize that there's actually some very good music indeed. And I think the problem had more to do with prominent guitarists dismissing it before really understanding how it was supposed to sound, and not really giving it the full attention it deserved. And so now we start to see concert artists programming Carulli and Moretti and composers who we kind of dismissed in earlier generations. But this music is really terrific, much of it. And it starts in the hands of specialists who are using 19th century instruments and playing as historical performance practice specialists. But now it's sort of little by little entering the mainstream, and we see people entering major competitions playing works by Moretti, for instance. It just would have been unthinkable 25 years earlier.
So I'm going to back up a little bit. You'd mentioned arranging. I think one of the things I recall originally meeting you is, I think at the time you might have just finished the Chopin stuff, or you were in the middle of it or something, just growing the repertoire. But yeah. I guess just to talk about you some more, since you're a guest, so what drove you to take on some of these challenges? I mean, that was a monster effort, I'm certain, to put all that together.
So you're referring to a project I did in the early 2000s, arranging solo piano pieces by Chopin called mazurkas. Chopin wrote more mazurkas than he wrote of anything else in his repertoire, so there were over 50 of them. Right. It's not that I looked at that and decided I'm going to play 50 mazurkas. It's a little bit more organic than that. And there were a couple of them I thought were charming, and I thought I could make work on the guitar, and I just.
So is that the impetus for it? You kind of obviously enjoyed listening to Chopin. You heard some of those, and you said, that might actually work. That one. And that one might actually work. I think I could work that out. And is that kind of how it transpired?
I think since I started as a classical guitarist, really from very young, for some reason, I began a process of imagining the music I heard as played on classical guitar. Like my brain would just go to that. So if I'm listening to a popular song, it's like I would imagine it played as a solo piece on the guitar. If I'm listening to an orchestral work, I'm imagining it on the classical guitar. And certainly when I listen to piano music, it just sounds like guitar music to me, but really good guitar music. And I had heard quite a bit of Chopin growing up. My mother was a Chopin fan, and we had LPs in the house and so on. And so it was familiar to me. And but the mazurkas, there was something about them. They're just not too long. They weren't too fast. The textures weren't too dense. It wasn't like, if you listen to music by, let's say Debussy, he's using the lowest notes on the keyboard. He's using the highest notes on the keyboard, and the pedal's always down, and everything's ringing, and it just doesn't sound like guitar music. But when I listened to the Chopin mazurkas, I could picture this music on the guitar. So I would just try to find out the key, figure out what key it would work most comfortably in, and I would just get out my pencil and my manuscript paper and start writing. And so I created a short set of them, maybe 3 or 4 of them, and I played them in concert. And I just really liked it, and I decided to try some of the longer ones. And then I got in about 20 or 30 of these mazurkas. I thought, I'll just go for the whole set, And this is maybe a personality flaw I have, where I just can't resist the sort of bibliographic approach to something. Like, I can't just leave it well enough alone. I have to do them all, And there's no question that there are a handful in that set that are a bit of a stretch to play on solo guitar. But, I figured out how to do it. I found a way in, and I recorded all 51 of them. So in doing so, I added certainly a couple of hours of repertoire to the solo guitar literature from a period of music when we don't have music of that quality in some ways.
Sure.
Certainly be argued, and I just really think they sound great on guitar. So now I don't know to the extent to which anyone else has been playing them, but I hope that people try them. They're really wonderful. And then a project that took my attention after that, but in the same style, was the Songs Without Words by Felix Mendelssohn. It's another beautiful collection of solo piano pieces. Some of them are truly too difficult for a solo guitar, but I found about 30 of them and arranged them and brought them out in a book. But those two, they just sound remarkable to me on the guitar. It's like the best guitar music you've ever heard. And some of them, they're just not as difficult to play as you might imagine. They fit kind of nicely on the instrument. So yeah, it's a labor of love. I mean, I love the music. I'm jealous. I want to play it, so I just make it my own.
Sure.
Yeah, I have that book right over there, the Complete Chopin Mazurkas by you. I've looked and I played through a couple just to see about adding them to the repertoire for a concert, but I haven't done it live just yet. So.
Well, I hope you do sometime. They're awfully fun to play, and of course some of them are pretty hard, but others are quite accessible, quite easy. I just always suffered from piano envy, so
yeah.
That's the
Oh
result.
yeah. For sure. On the topic of piano, I don't know if you've heard this guy, but Vikingur Olafsson, he's an Icelandic pianist, and he's recent. I think he came onto the scene like 2012, something like that. But his Bach album is just unbelievable. Like, that's on in my house so much it drives my entire family crazy. His playing is just sublime, and I was. Just to kind of shout it out there, because I've been in the piano envy camp for a while once I realized what it's capable of. It's like you can do anything on this thing. Yeah, exactly. Every guitar player that knows what a piano can do should have some case of piano envy. It's like, oh yeah, I just can't do that. But
I'll have to look for him. He sounds wonderful.
Oh, he's sublime. Wow. Just wow. And maybe it's because I'm listening through like high-end headphones, but the detail in terms of his just the interpretive and the voicing and the control throughout it is just stunning. I sit there with my jaw open, like, how do you maintain that awareness of where you're at, just even volume-wise with each one, and continually, the entire piece is consistent. If he's going up to where it's forte, it's always going to be at that particular level. And I'm pretty sure that's not happening on the mix end of things, because it starts out super quiet, and it's like it's clearly they've had, if any, compression just a little bit to kind of like taper the edges, but it's wow, just okay, I gotta stop, otherwise I'm gonna keep raving about it. So
something to look for. Thanks for that recommendation.
Now, it's funny that you mentioned Debussy, because that also was the inspiration for your Three Musings, if I'm remembering right from reading that, and so on, just that style of impressionistic writing.
Yeah, it's true. I love the sound of impressionistic music, and find we don't have very much in the guitar repertoire that qualifies,
right,
that has that effect. And so that was a little piece of group of original pieces with that sort of sound world in mind, that sort of harmonic language. And again, beautiful to play, really fun to play on the guitar, and fascinating to get those textures out of the instrument. I'm not the only composer who's tried to look for those sounds on the guitar, but so little by little, sort of 100 years later, we're getting music in sort of that vein, which is
I think it was extremely successful. Just I remember listening to them when you posted them or whatever, and I re-listened today, and like you said, it's not something you generally hear on the guitar, really, right? I'm not totally sure where. I'm not even sure that it's necessary. I would be curious if your take on it is extremely difficult to play or not, but what a vibe. Like, it sounds so good on guitar. And just imagining it in, in a great hall or something too, and just the way it would fill the space. And I mean, it's sort of breathtaking the way it sounds. It's amazing. Yeah.
Well, I'm real tickled you like it. It's the pieces are not easy. Like one of them is a tremolo piece. And so you know, the tremolo, if you can play tremolo, it's no harder than the other tremolo pieces in a way. I mean, I use the entire neck of
Right.
the instrument, but so does Barrios. He uses the entire neck of the instrument. So, in a way, the tremolo piece is the easier one. The others have some complexity, but you know, again, we're talking about the level of the playing, even you know, among junior high school age students. So I guess I'm not too worried about how difficult my work is
Yeah.
for relative to other people's ability to play it. Like some of the more recent pieces um, uh, I wrote these suites for guitar in 3 different styles. One group is kind of inspired by Latin American styles. One is a little bit more jazz and blues influenced, and then the other is a little bit more impressionistic and sort of neoclassical. But they were initially conceived as studies to help advanced players improve their skills.
Yeah.
And I finally sort of came to grips with the fact that they're just a little bit more adventurous than the average etude, and they really sort of deserve to stand as just concert pieces. But that doesn't mean they don't have sort of an etude quality, in the sense there might be a specific technique that's featured in each one. And
Yeah.
so, for instance, there are ones that have slurs, let's say left hand hammer-ons and pull-offs as a focus. And so if you're particularly weak at slurs, if you can master this piece, you'll get good at slurs, you know. Or
Sure.
let's say harmonics, you know, it's a piece that has a lot of different ways of playing harmonics and interesting conjunction. And so if you were to play the piece, you know, it would teach you how to do harmonics in the way a study would teach you how to do it, but they're fun pieces to play.
Yeah. Something
Yeah,
I
I
wanted to go.
remember-
Oh, go ahead.
No, it's all to you, Tim.
Well, I was going to change topic slightly, but just to reflect on something you just said, which is initially you had mentioned how in the 70s and stuff that maybe just getting through a piece was enough, right? It's like,
Right.
and I just wanted to reflect on an experience I had with you, and I recall one time, and I worked really hard, I thought, to get a piece up to speed, and I think I had all the notes basically right or whatever, and the timing was essentially right, you know. But I played it for you, and you were kind of like, yeah, but you didn't actually play the piece. Like, just getting through the notes, like, it was a really good moment for me as a musician, because unfortunately at the time I think I thought just playing the notes was enough, right? Like almost like a computer, like getting to that point, and you're kind of like, okay, well, you're about 5% of the way, where I thought like, man, I just busted my butt to like get to this point. And I thought like I was just gonna like wow you or something, you know, and you were just kind of like, yeah, okay, well, we got a lot to work on still. Like we're not even like close, but it was great. Like I always like reflect on that moment of like, what is music, you know, these kind of things, like what makes something really great. And then I guess I'm not totally sure where I'm gonna go with all this, but like also just the point of, it doesn't have to be complex or not complex or whatever. Just making music was such a big deal, and even playing 3 notes or something takes a level of mastery to really do it right. And I always really like think about that now. Like every time I play or whatever, it's all those little it's all the little things and all that make it really important to how you express yourself, and what a like huge effort it is too, as a you know, as a listener, as a practicer of music, to even reach those levels, to play at the level. I guess what it must have been happening during that time that you switched from, okay, the notes are enough, to getting that sort of artistic interpretation stuff became so much more important, and honing that in. I'm imagining you've had this experience probably with every one of your students at some point, where you kind of had to say like, here we are, like, okay, now let's really start playing some music, because I don't know. I'm gonna let you go. But.
Well, I think, you know, what you say is fascinating. On the one hand, I'm sorry I burst your balloon there.
That was great.
But I do think that there's little that's more humbling than being a serious musician.
Yeah.
It always feels like the better you get at it, the more there is to learn. Like
Sure.
the more you know, the more you don't know, and it's truly the journey of a lifetime to be a musician. Certainly, when I was just starting, I didn't know about interpretation because we were um, we were in such a state of struggle over just getting the notes, as you point out. But little by little, it becomes clear that that's only the entry point, you
Yeah.
know, and and then what you do with those notes is really what it's about. Although your observation that maybe I have that experience over and over, it is true that this is the experience of many students. Although ironically, some of them come in and they are like 99% interpretation and 1% skill at landing the fingers in the right place. Like they're all emotion and feeling, and
Yeah.
they have all the right impulses, but they need to work on finding the discipline to actually, working on the mechanical parts. And so everybody sort of has their strengths and their, you might say, their superpowers and their
Right.
weaknesses, and so everybody's got something to work on. I will say that for myself, I've only just now feel like I understand how to learn a piece of music. Like I finally get it. Like if I'm going to get up and perform now, um, I feel really confident that I'm going to do exactly what I want to do on the instrument. That things aren't going to go sideways, and I'm not going to fall off the saddle in the middle of the show.
Yeah.
It's it's because I know what to do. But it took me my entire life to figure it out. And I will say that to the advantage of the younger set, they're getting this younger and younger, and I'm just thrilled for them, and I'm thrilled to the extent that I can be the one that helps many of them in my own teaching. They can figure this, like get their hands on the secret sauce.
Sure.
But it certainly took me a very long time to figure it out, and because it's a very, very complex task we're engaged in. It's
Right.
not it's not purely athletic, although it's definitely partly athletic because we're trying to make our hands do incredibly difficult, incredibly complicated things, and we're asking them to do it in stressful circumstances. While we're in front of people, there's people watching, we're in front of a microphone, we're recording, whatever, and it's very difficult. And then in addition to that, you're trying to plumb the depths of your soul to come up with
That's right.
an interpretation to have that has meaning not just for listeners but for yourself. You want the performance to feel like something, to mean something. Otherwise, why are we doing it? You keep coming back to that. We're not doing it, at least I'm not doing it to impress anybody. It's like
Sure.
if you hit all the notes and it's really, really fast and it's really, really clear, there are those who will be impressed by that. But that's not really the game that I'm playing.
Sure.
Like it's really. But in order to make all the pieces of the puzzle work, that the interpretation is authentic, that it's original, that it's yours, that you can tap it at will, and that your hands will behave and operate the way you want them to at will every time. And this is the journey of a lifetime.
Certainly. Yeah. It also, and this is not a negative, but it also made me realize that I had to pick what I was going to focus on, and that the amount of effort really to become like a world-class classical guitarist or whatever was not the path that I was on. But it's only because I had so much respect for when I saw, when it's like kind of like I got a glimpse of the light of what it really was. And it's something that I strive for in my music, but like what it really takes to be that it's really like 100% sort of dedication to that craft for quite a long time.
But let's say that's the exact dedication you need for any craft.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, for instance, like the extent to which I dabble with and have admiration for the Great American Songbook and all the jazz standards that maybe were the bread and butter of your work as a jazz musician, and let's say in the context in which done, hundreds and hundreds of arrangements for solo classical guitar. It'd be very easy for me to sit down with those pieces and arrange them in a way that's compelling or convincing
Certainly.
on a classical guitar. But I resist doing so because, to me, the language that I'm speaking in that particular musical style needs to be the language of improvisation, and not the language of making a hard and fast decision, writing it down on paper, and then doing it like that every time. It's like, well, it'll sound like you're improvising, but it's not the real thing. And,
Sure.
so I tend to resist doing that, even though sometimes I feel compelled to try. Like I remember encountering for the first time the great Roland Dion's jazz standard arrangements, which are really fun to listen to, and I've taught them as a teacher a number of times. But to me, they're kind of this shadow of the music, because I'd rather hear someone who can do that sort of on the fly. That's the skill.
Right.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I forget who I was watching. They did an arrangement of Autumn Leaves, and I was like, well, all the notes are there.
Yeah.
That, it's like it works. There's the melody, and there are some interesting things, but it wasn't jazz. And I'm not.
Maybe it was jazz in the hands of someone who with just less experience. Like.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Class,
Exactly. That was my point. It wasn't bad. Like, I'm not knocking on that, but the difference between them and a straight up jazz guitar player that just opened it up and just comped it is night and day. Just for stylistic reasons. It's like you can't. It's very hard to serve two masters when you're dedicating something to guitar. I mean, that was one of the things that Neil brought up with the interview. It's like he was studying with you, and he got signed for an electric guitar label at the same time. He's like, I can finish the classical thing or go for all in the electric. I'm going to do that, And so he pursued that for obvious reasons. And
Neil made the right decision. I mean, he knew where his heart was and where the opportunity lay, and I couldn't have applauded him louder. We all met at the University of Akron.
Yep.
And I taught there for 34 years, and I always loved teaching there. This was, of course, my bread and butter for my career. I got that job when I was 24, and I saw many classes of great musicians come through there and find their way into the world as professional musicians one way or another, which is very gratifying for my career. But one of the things that I remember in particular was the extent to which the students were strivers. I didn't have classes full of students who had, let's say, the golden spoon in the silver spoon, so to speak, in their mouths. People had to work for it. People were paying their own tuition and working really hard to make ends meet. And as a result, they learned to, what I used to call hustle, to hustle in the field of music from a very early age. And I remember very vividly having a prospective student sitting in on class once with his parents, and I invited them to ask some questions of the students who were there and of me, and one of them asked, do any of the students do any teaching? And I said, oh, well, they all do teaching. In fact, let's count how many students my students in this classroom are currently teaching. And I had maybe 12 guys there, and between them they were teaching over 150 students.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. It was like these parents' eyes popped out of their heads. It's like, you're kidding me. And I'm telling you, they make like $20 an hour doing this. This was back in the 90s or whatever.
Right.
And And they were like, "This is unbelievable. These guys are making money and they're teaching like that." And it's because the students who came to the university realized that they needed to be working professionals right from the get-go. And of course, I always encouraged them, um, but they were willing to do it, and I always was very impressed by that. And as a result, many of them found success in no small part because of those efforts they engaged in as when they were still students.
It's a very
I
interesting.
remember
That's a
landing
great
my first
observation.
teaching gig.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead,
And
Adam.
while I was at the university, no, I was going to say, I remember landing my first teaching gig while I was at the University of Akron. It was like, wait a minute, I'm getting how much? All right, I can live with this. And, you know, it ended up, that was at Lentines, when Lentines existed out in Fairlawn. And I had 30 students teaching there, and it was
Yeah.
great. And then they shut down, and you know, that caused a little bit of chaos, but I ended up doing my own thing for a bit, and then working for Kurt, and working my way around different teaching situations at the Laurel School. And then finally,
Sure.
Kenyon kind of dropped into my lap. It was one of those last minute interview things where I was getting a concert program ready, so I had a couple of pieces set, and I got an email from somebody saying, "Hey, Kenyon's looking for a teacher," and I'm like, "Well, the worst thing that can happen is nothing." That's it. So I went out and did the interview, which was basically a master class, and now I'm there all the time. So it's great. I love it. I absolutely love teaching, which is and I like concertizing as well. But I'm also a realist in the sense of the consistency needs to be there, and I need to eat, and I need to have the financial freedom. And the only way to do that is to teach. You know, unless you hit a certain level of concertizing, which nowadays is God only knows, because it's always in flux depending on if we're open, if they're shutting everything down, or in the current pandemic situation. So
I couldn't be more thrilled about your job there. It's wonderful, wonderful that you found that position.
oh, it's great. I really, really enjoy it. And like I said, I'm basically building the program from the ground up from the last gentleman that I took over from. And it's wild to watch. One thing that's interesting for me is to see students suddenly get into classical music. When they come in from like a rock background or an acoustic fingerstyle thing, and I'm like, well, you signed up for classical. We're doing strict classical. That's it. Let's go. And just teaching them how to, even because most of them actually don't know how to read a lick of music. So it's like I'm starting from the ground level and showing them this is an E, this is where you play it here, and so on, I and M, and going through all the absolute rudiments. And by the end of the semester, you know, they're finally playing some simpler Karkovsky pieces and so on. And they're like, I absolutely love this. They're like, I got to keep going. And that to me means that I'm hitting something correctly. You know, if I can inspire that
That's
much.
exactly what it is. I mean, you have to actually do the heavy lifting. You have to do the teaching. It's
Yep.
like when I first got hired at University of Akron, there were a handful of students there, but they really were starting at the beginning, you know. And so it's just, you have to create it. So I taught them what I thought they needed to know, just like you're doing. And before we knew it, you know, we had a real functioning program where they're playing repertoire. And so, you know, it's a great way to spend your time. You know, I have no regrets of any of it. And of course, the position I have at Oberlin Conservatory, which began in 1992, you know, I've been there for a long time now. So a similar legacy, if you like. My position there is not a full-time one, but I've had many times a studio as large as or larger than the one I had at Akron.
Yeah.
So it's a terrific group of guys, and it's just a really fascinating challenge to be involved with day to day, trying to bring the young players along.
Now, for a place like Oberlin, I'm assuming just because of the reputation of the school, there's a certain pedigree that's looking to get in there. Do you find a difference in that, for one? And I guess, you know, I'm thinking about Adam's building Kenyon up, right? How do you get to the point, or how much influence do you think you had into the point of almost like, let's say, recruiting higher level students so you can grow the program and it starts to get a reputation? And
Yeah.
you know, it's easier to take the person at third base to home run, right, than it is to take the person that has 3 strikes and, you know, whatever, ready to strike out.
No, that's very well put, and that's a good observation. I mean, recruitment is part of what we do as professional teachers always, in the sense that when we travel around playing concerts or give masters election or adjudicate contests or whatever it is we're doing out in the field, we're always keeping our eye out for potential students who might want to apply. And we certainly forge relationships with them when we can, and that counts as recruiting, but it's also just getting to know people. It's pure pleasure. But to a certain extent, the type of people who audition and apply to Oberlin self-select a little bit. So I tend to get very few applying who aren't already pretty advanced.
Sure.
Which was not the case in this university. At Akron, we would sometimes get people entering the program who really didn't know how to play. I'd kind of show them from the beginning. But at Oberlin, they already know how to play. They already have experience. Many times they've played in guitar ensembles that have given public performances, and they have a bit of a resume, if you like, already, and oftentimes very, very good technique. And in fact, it's not uncommon, and certainly for the last 10 years, it's been more and more common, where my entering, like the equivalent of high school seniors applying to go to Oberlin, are every bit as good as any doctoral candidate anywhere in the country. Like these are fully formed, professional level, virtuoso level players, and they're just high school kids. And so that's not uncommon. It's not uniform. It's not universal, but it's not uncommon. And so, there's recruitment to a certain extent. The sort of name and reputation of the institution itself does a lot of that work. But of course, my own work has an impact also.
Certainly. That's interesting. So what do you do
Did
for
I get
those?
to your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah, that's just. I don't have my own program, and I'm not really seeking to do that. But sometimes I've thought about like, what would that take, right? How do you go from a base level thing to becoming the prominent school? But I think something you said there made a lot of sense to me.
I'm sorry, this is a question that really pertains directly to what I did at University of Akron.
Right.
Because, here we have a school that was not known for music particularly, and certainly not known for guitar.
Yeah.
And a handful of students who were rather poorly trained before I got there, or not trained at all. And I had to figure out, like, what's the method, what's the path to get it from here to being a prominent guitar program, a well enough known guitar program that I'd get good applications from serious players from all around the country.
Yeah.
So, like, on the one hand, I'm trying to teach the individuals how to play guitar. On the other hand, I'm trying to build my program like that's the job. I have to build the program. And so the way to do that, I determined for myself was to first invite guest artists to come to the institution and teach master classes and play concerts. And this wasn't just because I thought that students would benefit from the classes, which they did, but it was because it created interest in the press. And so we would end up with articles and photos in the newspapers about guitar at the university, which was very helpful.
Plus, I'm imagining that...
I made a point of making...
Okay, I was going to say, plus imagining that some of the great players you had performing for the masterclass guest, that they're like, hey, there's some great players in Akron, right? That starts to get spread too, right? The networking.
Right, the word starts to get out. Not just that the students can play, but that there's a program there that supports touring serious professional musicians. It's like I've become part of the circuit, And then the next thing was to form alliances with all the serious guitar players and teachers in the region. So I was new in Ohio when I got hired, of course, and so I reached out to John Holmquist, who was up at Kent State University and Cleveland Institute, and I reached out to Laura Strabanian, who was at Baldwin Wallace Conservatory, and George Bachman, who was at Kent State Stark, and there were a number of players who were like the lead teachers. And I offered to come up and play for their kids, and I asked them to come down and play for my kids, and we tried to do some collaborations with them. And before long, we were fast friends, and we had this, effectively like an alliance. And we would start to feed each other's programs, to support each other's concerts, and there's a little bit more of a sense of the region instead of just our own individual little programs. And then of course the other part of it is just hitting the turf and playing concerts. So to build the program, you have to reach people who are still in school. So that meant playing in the high schools. And so I just, every week for years, I would go out and play solo performances and little presentations at all the area high schools. And I would go as far as I needed to, just driving my car around and of course playing regular concerts and anything I could do to get myself out in public.
Yeah.
And I was in my 20s doing this. And by the time I'd been at university for 6 or 7 years, it started to feel like, okay, I'm going to host the GFA now. And I did. I hosted the Guitar Foundation of America convention in 1988, which was my 7th year at the university. And we had Julian Bream as our headliner. And
whoever that is.
it was an incredible event. It was the best attended GFA in history. It was just an amazing event. And when I think back on it, I have to laugh because we not only did it without cell phones and without the internet, we didn't even have word processing. Like I had to write everything out in longhand and give it to a secretary who had to type it, who had to send it to the typesetter. Like it was just, it was old school, but we made that thing happen. We had Jorge Morel and David Tannenbaum and David Russell and the LA Quartet and Oscar Gilia, and it was just endless. So anyway, so you have a big event like that, and then all eyes are on your school. All eyes, the national attention is focused on this program. And it was shortly after that the GFA asked me if I'd like to host the Guitar Foundation of America archive, because I obviously had this hopping program, and they wanted it to be at a place where there was a real program. And I'm thinking, wow, this is great. And,
yeah.
And so, like it was just additive, little by little you do things. And of course, part of the result is that the students who come have a little bit more experience down the pike, and we build the graduate program, and before you know it, it's one of the players.
Jim, you talked about hustling. You're a hustler, right? I mean,
sure.
To get to that point, I mean, just what it takes to get there. A lot of times we see it. There's musicians kind of wonder why things aren't working out for them, but they're not trying to get gigs, and they're not putting out records, and they're not networking, they're not doing all these things, but that's just what it takes, right? Even today, I think you can't. Maybe you get lucky and you put a video out and something happens, but the tried and true method is still the same method, right? It's still going and do those gigs for the high school and just meeting people and making sure you're at these events and talking to the luthiers and talking to this. You never know. It's the whole thing, right?
It's work. It's hard work.
Yeah, it's hard work.
And you're always doing it. You're never off. Nowadays they call it entrepreneurship, which is a fancy word for hustling.
Right.
And I feel like I remember the day that I discovered one part of the industry. I'd had Bill Cannengeiser was my guest, and he was playing on our series at Akron, and he put out on the table where we took the tickets, he put out his latest CD and another CD and a couple of books that he'd published. And then he ended the first half of his concert with the really great piece that he had published his arrangement of. And then he ended the concert with another really great piece that he had published his arrangement of. And after the concert, he sold so much stuff, I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, that's how you do it,
Yeah.
Just learning by watching, and a few years after that, I had my own table full of books and records, that I had made, because I realized, according to a really nice way to put it, that I heard coined by Matthew Hinsley, an Oberlin graduate who's now the head of the Austin Classical Guitar, one of the big nonprofits in our field. He said, poetically, that you really need the largest footprint in the industry that you can get. You need to have your fingers in all the pies. So it's not enough to perform. It's not enough to teach. It's not enough to record. It's not enough to publish. It's not enough to give master classes, to work with the industry on cultivating or selling equipment or instruments. It's not enough to advise people. You have to do all those things.
Yeah.
Or whichever ones that you and your personality can bring yourself to do. Like not everybody's going to be able to do everything, but the larger the footprint, the more success you'll find.
Sure.
And I think that I just found that I was able to do the publications. I have a lot of publications out now, and a lot of CDs recorded, and I'm teaching a lot, and doing the contests, and so we just sort of do little by little. You do it all, I guess.
Yeah, sure. What do you think gave you that drive? Do you ever reflect on that? Were your parents hardworking, or what was it? Was there somebody in your life that you've aspired or aspired to be like, or anything like that, or were you just innately more like that?
Yeah. I had no shortage of inspiration, but I think we are who we are. Like some of this is just baked into our personalities.
Yeah.
For some reason, I just sort of had the capacity to kind of do more than one thing at a time, and kind of chase all these dreams, and not really realize that there might be failure along the way, or not really worry about it. Just sort of chase the idea when I get an idea. I have my stepfather was a cartoonist, and he was a self-made man and very inspiring in this. An artist and a cartoonist, and he would hop on the train with a portfolio under his arm. We lived in Connecticut, and he'd go down to New York City, and he'd go to the offices of the New Yorker magazine, and he'd sit down with the cartoon editor and put his work on his desk and try to sell cartoons. Every single week on Wednesday, he'd go down there and hustle. And then the ones that the New Yorker didn't buy, he'd try to sell to Look magazine and Saturday Review magazine and whatever, all the other magazines. And he became one of the top cartoonists in the country. And I had an uncle who was a musicologist. And he started as a scholar writing about Charles Ives, and little by little he became more prominent in the field, and at the top of his game, he was the editor of the New Groves Dictionary of Music and Musicians, American edition. He was the chief editor and was considered the dean of American musicologists before he died. And but like, I didn't hang out with him and talk music. Right. He was just at the family but he was out there being like a professional.
Right. You saw what it meant, or right. Yeah, you got a glimpse of what it takes.
I saw people who were living the life of a professional artist or musician in one part of the field or another. I have a second cousin who's a well-known drummer, and he was playing in a band on the Jersey Shore, and that band broke up, and he got hired by another band, which back then would have been 1970 something. He got hooked up with a guy named Bruce Springsteen, and he was the drummer of the E Street Band. The guy's name is Max Weinberg, and what a career he had,
Sure.
And he was just like a local drummer in a local band, just like I was a local bass player in a local band where I was. And we were each following our own paths. Max did incredibly well, and but I didn't have a lot of contact with Max. It's not like we hung out and talked trade. It was just like, wow, this cousin of mine is doing so well.
Sure.
But it's just like an example of what's possible. I mean, part of it is serendipity. We got luck. Part of it is our personalities. Some of it is certainly talent, but more of it is probably just hard work.
Yeah. Awesome.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. Gotta have the hustle.
I tell the students this, and they look at me sometimes like, what am I talking about? But, these are things you can encourage, but you can't really teach in a way.
Yeah, sure.
I distinctly remember something that you were telling us. I think it was I was sitting there with Mike Poplinsky, and you were just talking about different things and career-wise, and one of the things you said is just don't quit. He's like, are you... and I might be, misremembering, but the quote to me was, there was a lot of other players that could outplay me, but they all graduated and put their guitars in their case, and that was it. It's like me, I just made a bet with one of my colleagues not to stop till we got to this certain thing, and the next thing you know, I got there. And I took that, and I'm like, I'm going to do that too. That's right. It. The guitar stays out. I'm just going to aim at it, and no compromise. You always keep pushing on it. And yeah, eventually, to tag on the serendipity thing, the Kenyan thing could kind of drop there. But I would also say that the consistent practice, the consistent keeping those skills up, it made it so that when I went to that interview, even though it was like, I had 3 days notice, it was, I could do it rather than being like, oh my God, I got to, it's like, no, I have stuff ready. Let's go.
Probably should
Exactly.
change
You
my
always
strings.
have to be
Yeah,
ready.
right.
Yes, that would. we were undergraduates. I was hanging out with my roommate, who was Nick Galusis, who's now the head of the guitar department at
No,
Eastman
just
College of Music, right? Yeah,
I
and
was
we were
teasing.
like, how are we going to make it in this field? And it was exactly that. It was like, well, let's just not do what all our classmates did. They quit. Let's not quit, and that'll be our pact, and we'll be the last guys standing, And that does seem to be the way it ended up after a fashion.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that I tell, like, the students of mine that are really interested in it. I'm like, the biggest thing is to be consistent and not stop. That's it. You have to keep it going. And stuff, the opportunities will come up, but if you don't have something in your back pocket ready to go, you're going to lose it to the guy that does. And so you got to be that guy. You don't have to be the next David Russell. You don't have to be the next. And clearly I'm not in that league at all. And that's fine. But the point is that I'm constantly working at it. So when the opportunities come up, it's like, yeah, sure, I'm ready. I don't have to go, oh, I got to blow the dust off of the guitar and start going again. It's like, no, I got it sitting here. I'm good to go. What do you need? Type of thing.
Right.
And all those skills that I picked up from your classes, particularly the arranging class, which was murder on my free time, because that was like, it was only like 2 credit hours, and I was putting in like 18 hours a week on that class by itself.
Yes, I recall.
Yeah, that was brutal. I had to take it twice. The first time I just wasn't ready theoretically. I didn't have the background. And then once I got that second time through, it was just like there was so much meat in that class to devour and get ready. And, 1 week, here's your piano score. You have 1 week to arrange this and play it next week. Good luck. And I was just at the time I was dating Julie, and she's like, this is crazy how much work this is. I'm like, yeah, that's part of it. And now that's routine for me. It's basically like, if I'm doing a wedding and they want something arranged, I'm like, okay, I want it at least 3 weeks before the wedding thing. If you want it arranged, that'll give me time to write it and get it set and everything else. It's like in the routine. Boom.
So you guys just
these are life skills for a real professional musician.
Exactly. And that's, I think there's this illusion of success that people take from watching artists of that, oh, they just get up there and play. I mean, at least maybe I'm talking from my own experience watching different performers through every type of genre. It's like, oh, they're just up there. And then when you start working in it, you realize, like, no, they live in this all the time. There is no off switch. It's one of the contentions that I have with my wife for vacations is I got to bring a guitar. Like, there is no vacation without a guitar, because I just sit there like twiddling my thumbs, and it's like, what, I could be working on something. And it's an enjoyment. Obviously I love doing what I'm doing, but it's like I'm always thinking in it. Without some way to get it out, I'd start.
Well, this is good. I mean, in many ways you have a lot of the same impulses that I did. Like when we would go on family vacations, like everybody else would be chilling after being on the beach all afternoon. And my chill is to be arranging more of those Chopin or mazurkas sitting at the table. I'm just always writing and doing, the wheel never stops turning.
Exactly.
And you just sort of use your time little by little, and I don't worry about trying to get things done in any hurry. It's just like in the fullness of time, you'll get through all these things, and then
Sure.
the next project comes along.
Yeah, I think it's
That
like
happens
you
to
have
be
to
the
think
undergirding thing for every.
I was just gonna say you have to think
there is
in like decades or something. Like you don't have to think about like next week. Like be thinking this might take a while, but it's all right. Yeah. Go ahead, Adam. Sorry.
Yeah.
There must be a delay. But
I was just going to say, with all the artists that we've interviewed, that happens to be the undergirding thing, is that it's just constant. There is no off time. Neil was the same way. He's like, I'm constantly working. It's like I go on vacation, I take my interface to my laptop and the guitar, and I'm working. It's just part of it. And
Sure.
that one of the things that Neil dropped, he's like, if you think I'm intense now when I'm working and just the load of focus, he's like, take that away from me and see how I get. It's like, I'm like, yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, this last vacation that we were on in North Carolina, the wife and kids were at the beach all morning when I was back at the camper practicing and working stuff out on the guitar, and then I would join them after lunch, after I felt like I got work in, so I could focus on having fun for a bit, and then I'd come back and be thinking in guitar and doing everything else like that. It just becomes part of you. And I remember when I was studying with you, you would mention things like that. I'm like, how the heck do you get to that point? Like, what gets your brain to click over? And it was just one of those things that just kind of happened. All of a sudden, I went from, casual intense but casual to being like, that's it. This is it. Everything comes focused through this lens now. And I can't pick like a date, but I know that there was a switch on my brain where it's like, this is it. This is all that I'm doing. Everything that I sit down, it's like I have my daily routine. It's wake up, get the kids to school, come down, sit down, practice from 9 to noon. I don't move, and then if I have to leave to go teach at the collegiate thing, I do that. If I have private students, and if I don't have that, from 12:30 to 3:30 when I pick up my kids, I'm sitting down and practicing the entire time. So
good, and it's working for you.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that I try to instill in my students. I'm like, if you want to do this, it has to be that part of you. And it will happen through consistency. Like I always, with your syllabus, it was, it should be at least 3 hours a day type of thing. And where I'm at now in the program, I don't have any majors just yet. I got my first declared minor, which is great, and she's doing fantastic. But I'm always like, you at least got to put in the time that you have for the lesson every day. And if you really want to improve, it should be triple the time. So if you're taking an hour lesson, the same mentality of that. But it has to be something where you rotate everything else in your life around it. It's going to be, this is my practice time, that's it. Not when I'm done with this, I'll get to practice. Practice is work. And so for myself, I noticed when I stopped calling it I'm playing guitar now or I'm practicing and went to I'm working, everything changed for myself mentally, but also the appearance to everybody else. Because, if it's like, oh, I play guitar, and they kind of think, oh, what he's doing. They're just sitting there getting high all day with an instrument, in his hands and trying to do something. And it's like, no, this is work.
The problem has always been the word play.
Yep.
Sure.
Yep.
It's a handicap in our field. Everybody thinks we're just playing.
Right.
Like playing video games,
Yeah, exactly. And it's fun to see students when they click onto that. I had this one young student. She was like 6, and she wasn't in the classical thing, but she was doing a singer-songwriter with the ukulele, and she was constant. Like, I was blown away. Every week, a new song, like lyrics and chords, just going. And she just worked it, and everybody else was like, "Well, how did she get to that?" I'm like, "She does this all the time." Like, she's walking around her house with her ukulele and sits there at night with her notebook and writes it out. It's part of her. And, I'm telling this to my teenage students and my older students. It's like, this is what it takes. If you want to do that, this is where it's at.
Again, we each have a personality. We have our own ability to focus like that. So it won't be the same for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm sure we've all had this. It's like you play a gig and then somebody comes up there like, oh, I wish I was so talented or something. And it's like, well, you could get there. You just got to put your 8 hours a day in for 10 years or 15. You probably do it faster than me because I'm not very smart. So it'll take me a while. It took me a while to learn a lot of stuff. You could probably do it quicker. But nobody wants to, they don't put the work in. So it's interesting.
Well, they just think you were born with it.
Yeah, they do, right? Definitely not.
Oh, maybe you're so talented.
Yeah, right. I hate that word. That's another
that meme where
handicap. I was gonna say it's another handicap. The word talent, right? Anyway.
Absolutely.
Talent equals hard work.
That's right.
Yeah, there was that study that came out about the prodigies at Juilliard, and the quote unquote childhood prodigies versus the rest of the students that would show up at Juilliard, and they just found that the prodigies were in the practice room 20% more than the other ones. That was it. They're like, the kids just practice more, and between 6 and 8 hours over the course of a year, that's a huge amount of time that the other person has gotten in versus the good musician, you know, to kind of put a label on it. It
It's
always
always the challenge to the teacher to get the students to practice more. And that's the gold standard. Just, practice more.
Yeah, that's right.
And
it's also, I spend a lot of my time in teaching trying to talk to the students about what they should be doing in the practice room. And, a lot of times there's time wasted.
So much.
You might even say the vast majority of time they spend is wasteful, And so we spend a lot of time sort of refining how to use that time and how to make decisions about time management and how to solve problems and recognizing problems. And in that way, they can make their progress in better time. But it's a challenge. It takes years to sort it all out.
I remember something you said to me, and it's really helped me through the rest of my life, actually, which was, I think I was struggling because of my schedule was crazy, and I was teaching a bunch too, like 30 to 40 students, and I was double majoring, and I never had time, and like to get like 3 hours in a row was impossible, right? And even getting like an hour sometimes was impossible. And you're like, well, do you have 15 minutes? Or something like that. And I'm like,
yeah.
Because you could just work on one thing for 15 minutes and you make a lot of progress. And like, that was actually really a life-changing sort of thing for me, because that's sort of how my life is now. It's always like these sometimes I get 6 hours or something, but a lot of times it's 15 minutes here. I have guitars in every room in the house, I can grab and just work on something, focus on it, and you could really sort of nip something in the butt in 15 minutes a lot of times. That was a struggle.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah. Just a focused 15 minutes. Yeah.
That's really wonderful, and I love that you remember that. It's I find that I would often do some of my most productive practicing in the 5 minutes between when a student was supposed to show up and when they actually showed up.
Oh, right.
I got 5 minutes here, probably, and you just sort something out. You just sort of answer a question and just the accumulation of small investments of energy like that is often enough.
Yeah.
But during those minutes, you're 100% focused on solving the problem.
Absolutely. Yep. That's the big thing. It's not necessarily how much you practice. I mean, that counts, but it's also how you practice and where your focus is. I learned that once I had Sam. It was like my free time just swoop. I have an infant, so how the hell do I get in a couple of? I don't have a couple of hours.
No, exactly. Being a young parent is a perfect example of
very
this
much.
challenge.
Yeah. Like, how do you balance keeping the kid alive and practicing at the same time? So, well, you figure it out. You really do. It's one of those things where I didn't have an option. It was like either quit where I'm at because I have a kid, or figure it out. Obviously, I chose to figure it out, and that's just it. There's any amount of excuses that life will throw at you to not do it, to not put the time in, to not. Well, I can't practice because I got this going on. And it's like you have to make a decision where you're going to lay with that, and
sure.
It's. I'm not saying it's easy, but it totally can be done. And so when students, I kind of like, it's one of those things where if they're coming in, well, I couldn't have time. I had these other things, and I'm like looking at them like, really? Let me tell you what life is like on the other side. Part of me just kind of is like, do you realize what I've sacrificed to get to this point with that? And I sound like a grumpy old man at times, but it's part and parcel for the course. That, and sometimes I'll drop something in a lesson. I'm like, that was totally Steve. It's like you were sitting over my shoulder, coming through my mouth with giving him a point or a critique. It's like, that's a totally Steveism on that one. Oh, well, no. I did spend enough time underneath them to have those things. So
my name has become a noun, Steveism.
It's part of it. We have to take those gems that stay with us forever, that were, right, in the truest sense of the word, they were life-changing in terms of the approach to the guitar. And we keep
when I had you guys in the studio, I mean, my biggest challenge was to try to get you to point the neck in the right direction.
I know. I said we never fixed that.
Never fixed that problem at all.
The two of you plus Tommy Guarino, the three of you, all three left-handed. Incredible.
Yeah, it just kind of happened. And then you had us going like, well, Steve's left-handed, but he's playing right-handed.
Yeah, it's a traitor.
A traitor there.
I'm a traitor. Always have been.
Oh, geez, those were some crazy times. I mean, I remember when we bought me and Pleblinski, and I don't know if Michael Issel is in on this as well, but we bought diapers and sent them to the Oberlin students because we were just kind of picking on them for being so young. It was like, hey, here you go. Here's your Hal Leonard book and diapers, you know.
Yeah, there was a very cheerful competitiveness between the two studios.
Yeah, it was good fun. A whole lot of fun.
I missed the Akron studio, no question about it.
Sure.
If you were gonna sit down and tell a student what you thought was the most important thing when it came to practicing and so on, what would that be?
Well, truthfully, the most important thing for every student, regardless of where they are technically, is to remain at least somewhat aware of why they're doing it in the first place. It's like, if artistic accomplishment is at the forefront of their awareness, then they'll do things in a way which is artistic. If they're looking for a little bit of poetry in the music, they're looking for beautiful sound, they're looking for a way to communicate music that makes people want to hear them play another piece yet and listen to them more, then I think they're putting their attention in the right direction. Clearly you have to solve technical problems in order to play beautifully, but it's too easy to focus on the technical challenges at the expense of the artistic message. So I would just say, always remember why you're doing it, and look for and believe in your own voice. It's like it's not about sounding like some other person. It's about finding what you want to sound like, and then working to bring that so other people can hear it.
Awesome. That's why I've always liked you.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, we all need to sound. We should end up sounding different because we are all different. I think there are some studios around the country where the guitar students tend to sound more similar to one another, and I like to imagine that my studio is not one of them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very. Wow, I'm going to chew on that for a bit.
Well, I hope that's something. Well, it's great to see both of you, and it's great to talk to you. I appreciate being invited to be part of your series.
Yeah.
We
appreciate
great.
it.
We've been looking forward to it for a long time, so it finally could happen, and thank you so much for spending the hour and a half or so with us and dropping all the knowledge bombs that we can take. So.
All right. Well, good luck to both of you, and I look forward to crossing paths in real life.
Yeah, for sure.
All
Hey, Steve.
right, sounds like a
one
plan.
more thing.
Thanks again, Steve.
Steve,
bye.
to find your stuff, is that StephenAron.com?
Oh, yeah.
If people want to find your books and your music, and is that a good place to find it?
My website is stephenaron.net.
Okay.
And but if you just Google me, I've got like 150 videos on YouTube and countless articles on a blog on my website. I've got so many articles on this blog that I put a new segment on the blog called the Blog Articles Index. And so you click on that and you can scroll through quickly to see what the pieces are about. Many of them are about how to practice and what to do in the practice room, and other articles about what the students are doing on stage at the college. So
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure we steer people your way too. So
thanks so much.
yeah, appreciate
Great to
it.
see you both.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.